about culture. They were interested in Christopher Columbus because he was going to bring them gold from the New World. But otherwise, they didn't care. They had conquered the beautiful mosque in Cordoba, the chief city in Al-Andalus. And they had torn out the mid part of the building and replaced it with a Spanish cathedral. Ugly as sin. The building still stands there. But that was the extent of cultural care of Ferdinand and Isabella. And they were also dour people who didn't care about their religion. What they wanted was everyone to be Catholic. And so they came out with an edict that from now on, everybody in Spain had to be Catholic. And if you weren't Catholic, and if you didn't leave, if you weren't Catholic, then you either left the country or it was off with your head. And so now, here in Spain, there is tens of thousands of highly sophisticated, highly skilled craftsmen, musicians, people from all walks of life, who all of a sudden are being told, out you go, leave, or you lose your head. And so all over Europe, Muslims and Moors and other non-Catholics started looking. And so it was that a small group of loot builders ended up in Füssen, Germany. Now, when you see Füssen, it's an adorable little city. It's way up in the mountains. In winter, it's covered with snow. But it was a little city. The citizens did quite a bit of work. They were cutting trees because there were good trees in the Alp Mountains. Agriculture wasn't much. They did some trading with cities in Italy, but otherwise it was hard to make a living in Füssen in the year 1500. And now all of a sudden, here's all those Spaniards coming and telling the people in Füssen, you know what? We might have a way to make you work in the slack time of the year. Just listen to us. And the Spaniards started explaining that in order to make good musical instruments, you select just the right piece of wood, be that pine, be that any other material, be that larch, it doesn't matter, but it has to be seasoned properly, it has to be dried, and then you sketch out the exact dimensions of the piece you want to make, and you make sure that it was cut properly, and then you use dry heat and wet heat to season the piece just right, and then you put all the pieces together. Only now came the big difference that the Spaniards brought. And the Spaniards really were very enthused that they had been received so well in this little German village, because they were people of a different color, they were people with a different religion, they were people with a different accent, and Fusen had welcomed him with open arms because the Spaniards had said, we are going to pay you through the winter. And so the Spaniards explained, come spring, you could build lutes, but you know, by the time you put them in a big chest, you can put 2 or 3 instruments on top of a donkey, and then the donkey has to go all the way down the valley, down to Italy, down to Venice, and that, or you can do the way we are going to tell you now, and that is that you cut all the pieces, you season them, you do everything you would normally do, except the last step. You don't assemble the final pieces, because we are going to leave that for the craftsmen in Venice, and they will make the lutes there, and you will do the prefabrication. And that way, you now can stack a dozen instruments on one donkey. Much more efficient. Well, it all made complete sense to the people in Fusen, and they were really taken by those Spaniards. And somehow the Spaniards and the people from Fusen took to each other. And for a century, Fusen, Germany, which is in the southern part of Bavaria, was the center of lute industry in Europe after the lute builders had been kicked out of Spain. But in those days, things didn't last. Perhaps they still don't last, but they certainly didn't back then. And what happened in 1618? The 30 Years' War started. It was a time in Europe that you couldn't say one thing or somebody said, isn't there going to be a war? And that's exactly what happened here. A war was in the making. Somehow the Catholics and the Protestants, just as they had been fighting a little bit in Spain, but they were fighting much more so in Europe, they just couldn't help themselves. They were going to fight. And pretty soon, all over Europe, countries took sides. And they were either one side or the other. For the city of Fusen, it didn't matter. They did not want to be part of the war. They wanted to make money. For a century, the Spaniards had given them this good life, and that's what they wanted to keep. But no matter what the people in Fusen did, it was to no avail. Fusen was too rich a target. It was too attractive. And before the end of the 30 Years' War in 1648, the poor city of Fusen was completely demolished. Now, eventually, the city got rebuilt. And some of the lute production even got restarted. But you know, now the people in Fusen had to work with a different aesthetic. Until that time, people loved their musical instruments not too loud, little bit in the background, sweet, genteel. And now there was a different taste, a different aesthetic. People wanted musical instruments that were louder, such as the pianoforte and the violin. And the lute now was looked at as a relic of the past. And that is how, after a century of lute production, the city of Fusen lost the lute production that had made him so famous. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Fascinating history. I don't hear much about instruments and what happened to them and how they developed. That was very interesting. Thank you so much. Okay, so Andrew, are we up with our next teller yet? This is Andre Wilson. Okay.
Hello there.
Now, I've heard Andre tell quite a few different stories in different places, and you're in for a real treat. He told me that his family were storytellers, artists, teachers, and he kind of grew up with that. And he, as an adult, he has dabbled in poetry. He's produced, he's written stories and had them published in different publications. And we are in for a real treat here. Thank you so much, Andre.
Oh, thank you, Ed, for your gracious introduction. And before we get started here, I do have a content warning for this story here. It's a true personal story, and it does contain acts of racial violence and one use of the N-word. When I was in my late teens, I wanted to be a forest ranger. I lived in the city of Los Angeles in the community of Sun Valley, which abuts the Verdugo mountain range with around the San Fernando Valley. So I could exit my apartment and go right out in the mountains. And I would explore and learn different things. In fact, I learned the identity of 100 different plants and flowers, including those that are edible. I learned to identify animals by their footprints and by their scat. But after traveling around that mountain above my apartment so often, I wanted to go further afield to the other mountains and the canyons and creeks throughout that northeastern corner of the San Fernando Valley. And I would ask my friends to go with me. But there were certain places where African American boys and Mexicans would never go to. I would look at the map and say, hey, how about we go hiking over to LB Creek? And a black boy would say, no, not LB Creek. There's some rednecks up there. I thought, wow. Well, how about we go hiking up to Latuda Canyon? And a Mexican American would say, no, not Latuda Canyon. That place is filled with white supremacists. So I thought, wow, well, how about on the map here? Why don't we go up hiking up Little Tahunga Creek? And a black boy would say, no, don't go to Little Tahunga Creek. That place is filled with the Ku Klux Klan. So I was frustrated. I wanted to go out hiking and to have fun. I thought that as long as I was in open space, that nothing would happen to me. So nobody wanted to go with me. But finally, this light-skinned Salvadorian, this boy who was really into army camouflage and survivalist gear, he said, hey, Andre, how about we go hiking up Big Tahunga Creek? And I thought, yeah, Big Tahunga Creek is big and wide open. It's a free open space. There are no fences. Nothing would happen to us there. Let's go hiking up to Big Tahunga Creek. So we started the plan. Unbeknownst to us at the time, in the vicinity of Big Tahunga Creek, there used to be an indigenous village of the Fernandinho Patabiam band of Mission Indians. And they had named this village Mazunga, which means in their Tongva language, the shooting place. So we started the very next morning, very early, and we headed out on foot to this area known as the Tahunga Wash. It's basically a floodplain filled with all these rocks and silt that comes down from the Tahunga Canyon, and just before the Hanson Dam Reservoir. So we started hiking along Big Tahunga Creek. But after a while, we encountered a group of white hikers, young men, older boys, hiking downstream in our direction. And they took one look at us and froze. And we took one look at them and froze. We both stood there staring at each other as if we were gunslingers at the OK Corral. And their faces screwed up and contorted in this horrible expression of horror, anger, and disgust. And they began to shout out, "What's that nigger doing here?" And I realized that we had encountered the very people we had hoped to avoid. White supremacists. The only weapons we had on us were these small little pocket knives. We didn't know what they were packing. Perhaps it would have made sense to turn around and head back, but they were heading in the direction that we came from. So we ran for our lives, diving sideways into the bushes, and we hid until they had passed. Then we resumed our hike, walking parallel to the Big Tahunga Creek. Then finally, going back towards the creek, we felt we were safe, and we began to cook our lunch, a can of bean on the fire. And just before it was finished cooking, I began to hear sounds of dogs barking and people coming upstream behind us. And I looked through the branch and I saw it was a group of young white men with these big, big dogs like Dobermans and pit bulls and Rottweilers, all off leash. And I yelled to my friend, hey, we gotta go, we gotta hide. There are people coming with dogs. And he snatched his hot can of beans right off the fire. He stomped on the fire and put it out with his foot and kicked dirt over it. And then we hid in the bushes as this pack of dogs and their white owners passed. And I laid there under that bush, and I could not believe it. I could not believe it. There I was in Los Angeles in 1984, and I'm running and hiding from people who might be white supremacists and their big attack dogs, as if I was a runaway slave running from slave catchers and their hounds. We became paranoid and avoided all contact with white people along the trail. And I was thinking, what did my ancestors do? What did my ancestors do? So, oh, I figured it out. Do not hike along the creek, because too many people hike along the creek. Too dangerous. Also, avoid hiking along the trails, because there are too many people hiking along the trails. So instead, like cartoon banditos, We actually dodged from bush to bush, rock to rock, as we slowly made our way up a big Tahunga Canyon. And my friend, he essentially was my Harriet Tubman because he was smuggling me through a dangerous country. And we kept on hiking. And we went under the underpass of the 210 freeway that goes over the Big Tonga Creek. And then we went under the underpass of the Foothill Boulevard that goes over the creek. And we kept on hiking until we reached the sign saying that said, "You are now entering the Los Angeles National Forest." And I looked and I said, "Oh my God, that must go up for miles and miles and miles up the creek." And I turned and looked behind me and I looked down at the valley at the path that we had came. And I looked at my watch and I said, "There's no way we're going to get back in time. There's no way we can travel through that dangerous territory. What if we meet with those people again?" So I said, "I got an idea. Why don't we cut sideways across the valley and come out to that community there where I used to go to high school. They have a bus line there that will take us straight home." So we began our trek back, going along this winding road out of Big Tahunga Canyon. And we would tense up and cringe whenever we saw a car go by because we feared that somebody would shoot us. By and by, we arrived back in this community abutting the Big Tahunga Canyon. It was the same community that did not want Black people to attend their schools. They did not want me to attend their school. It was the same community where police would stop me on the sidewalk and ask, "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" It was the same community where shopkeepers would draw a gun on me and say, "You steal any of my records and I will shoot you." It was the same community where when I was sitting at the bus stop, a motorist would drive by and throw, of all things, at me a dildo. It was the same community where my friend was shot at 2 times when we was hiking up in the hills, shot at a boy of 11. So we know this neighborhood didn't want Black and brown boys in it. So with 2 minutes to spare, we caught a bus at the same stop where I was attacked earlier. And we made our escape from Mazunga. And we never returned to finish our hike up the Big Tahunga. Shortly thereafter, I stopped hiking altogether. I was at a bus stop in front of my apartment one day when a little Mexican boy, Francisco, came up to me and said, "Hey, Andre, why don't you go hiking anymore?" And I joined the older Mexican American and African American boys when I said, "Nah, it's too dangerous for me out there." And the boy said, "It's just that you're too cautious." Perhaps he's right, because I gave up my dream of becoming a forest ranger. But in the past couple of days, I've been snooping around the government job websites, and I found out there are lots of jobs available for park rangers and forest rangers, like seasonal jobs, permanent jobs. And I'm thinking, I think I found something to add to my bucket list for when I retire, because I do not want fear and hatred to get the last word in my story. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Powerful, timely story. The time period you're talking about, I lived there. I was teaching in the San Fernando Valley.
Oh,
And I hiked all over. I didn't worry about anything.
no.
And it's just a sad commentary on our society that you had to experience those kinds of things. Woo. Makes me, rage. Uh, but I hope you follow that dream and become a park ranger and get out there and you
Thank
know,
you.
don't let anyone limit your behavior. Okay, our next storyteller is Sharon. So please highlight Sharon.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Am I unmuted?
Well, we're going to spotlight you in here. Okay, there we are. Okay. Oh, and I forgot to say that Andre was representing the Contra Costa tail spinners, and Sharon represents the Do-Tell story swap group in the Santa Rosa area that has just got back into doing Zoom things, which is really exciting. She's had a career as a bilingual teacher, and she's also an editor and ghostwriter for people's memoirs. Well, I bet that's very interesting. But she's got some stories about that. So please welcome Sharon.
Thank you. My story takes us back a couple of hundred years to when President Jefferson bought what would later be called the Louisiana Purchase. It more than doubled the size of the country. And the main thing was nobody knew what was out there. So the first order of business was to send some exploratory expedition out to find out what had actually been bought. Everybody knows about Lewis and Clark. They went north and west looking for the overland inland passage to the Pacific. And on the way, they had many, many adventures and covered themselves with glory. But not so many people know about the other adventurers that went forward at the same time. Zebulon Pike took an expeditionary group, and their task was to find the headwaters of the mighty Mississippi, which, as you know, rolled for more than 2,000 miles. The group initially decided to travel by dugout canoe, and so they went to work chopping trees and digging out canoes. Some Ojibwa folk who saw what they were doing mentioned to them that their tribe had been creating dugout canoes for hundreds of years, and they'd be happy to help them perfect their technique. Pike was amused to think that any ignorant savages could possibly know more than the United States Army, and so he graciously refused any help in creating these canoes. Eventually, they dug them out. They loaded them with all their food, clothing, supplies, and their ammunition, and those canoes promptly sank. So Pike commissioned his men to take the gunpowder and spread it out in trays to dry and put those trays over the fire. Well, once the explosions were over and the fires were put out, it was determined that they probably should travel overland. And up they went, on north and north, until they arrived at Wisconsin and what they thought was the headwaters of the Mississippi. And having dispatched their report back to President Jefferson, they turned south for the next adventure. It's unknown whether Pike ever learned that the headwaters of the Mississippi are not actually in Wisconsin, they're in Minnesota, but President Jefferson did find that out. Pike's next adventure took him south and west as he was trying to find the headwaters of the Red River and a couple of other adjacent rivers. On the way in the Colorado Territory, he encountered an enormous mountain, and it was determined that the expedition should summit this mighty peak. And so they began the climb, and about halfway up, they realized that they hadn't taken enough supplies to sustain them to the top. And so they turned back, and Pike never climbed Pike's Peak. But he soldiered bravely on and went into Mexican territory, which at the time was Spanish, and they promptly all became arrested and imprisoned. It took some serious negotiation with Washington to get Pike released, and many of his men were released. However, some were left behind as sort of a human collateral for many months, and they began to have some suspicions of doubt about Pike's leadership capabilities. Now, Pike began to realize that the messages he was sending back to President Jefferson were not burnishing his reputation. He needed something good, something that would delight the president and show him that he had chosen the right person to send out into the wilderness. And as they traveled and he debated the decision about what to do, he encountered a Native American man who was selling two adorable bear cubs. And Pike, realizing that President Jefferson loved the wilderness and loved things of nature and oddities, would be delighted with these bear cubs. And so he packed them up on horseback and sent them off to Washington, D.C. with his next dispatch, telling the president that these were a kind of bear never seen on the East Coast. President Jefferson was indeed interested in those bears and kept them in the White House for a little while, but they seemed to be doubling in size almost every day. And so eventually he caged them and put them out on the White House lawn. The difficulty there was that his enemies, his political enemies, could make great fun of this, calling the White House a bear garden, which was a 19th century term for a chaotic disaster. Jefferson knew those bears were too dangerous to keep for long. They were, after all, grizzly bears and growing by the minute. So he pondered what to do and eventually remembered that his friend Peel was opening a museum in Philadelphia. Peel's museum was to showcase natural history and interesting things of every kind. And so he wrote, and Jefferson actually used the words perfectly gentle and quite good humored to describe those bears that he sent up to Philadelphia. And Peel was very happy to get them until they got out of their cage and destroyed the kitchen and a couple of other areas within the museum. And it occurred to Brother Peel that the best way for those bears to be displayed to the public would be if they were stuffed. And so that was the sad end of the bears. And as for Pike, his name has lived on, maybe not the same way that Lewis and Clark's did. If you drive through Lewiston, Idaho, or Clark County, or any of the many things on the Lewis and Clark Trail, if you open any history book, Lewis and Clark are mentioned with great pride and admiration. Pike's name lives on when the old men sit around the coffee shop in the morning and they tell each other stories about their dogs and their horses and their adventures and their lives. There's always one that never picks up the tab, always one that reneges on his bets, always one that doesn't do his share. And the old men shake their heads and say, what can you expect? He's a piker.
Very nice ending. He's a biker, yeah. Thank you. All right. I definitely enjoy hearing stories about people that aren't so famous, that really did things that were very important in our history. There's a book I would like to recommend to all of you. It's called A Different Perspective, or A Different History by Ronald Takaki. And it really is the history of all the peoples that developed this country, including the Native Americans and the Chinese Americans, all the people. So it's a really diverse look at history and the important people involved in that, which is what we really need to be teaching our kids in school. Okay, our next storyteller is Marian Ferrante. Bring her up here.
Can I record myself? I don't know where to press the button.
You'll have to ask Andrew. Andrew, can't you?
So yes, you should be able to, when you put your cursor on the screen, you'll see a bunch of things at the bottom, the chat, the share screen. There
Yeah.
should be a record button there.
There is.
Yeah.
So if you click on that, it said record to your own computer. You should be able to do it.
Okay.
Okay, so Marian is the co-founder of the Delta Word Weavers 35 years ago. And she's a retired speech pathologist. And I met her when I was teaching at a community college in the area she was at. And together we started Telebrations at the college. And we did that for 14 years, 11 years.
11 at the college, yes.
And Marian has kept the Telebration alive. And Marian is also very instrumental in the Storytelling Association of California. She was on the board for many years, and she still contributes to our organization. So please welcome Marian Ferrante.
Thank you. Have you ever wondered, is there really a Bigfoot? Well, the people of Contra Costa County in California wondered if there was a gigantic snake slithering somewhere across our roads, across our fields and waterways. They wanted to know if this big snake was around. Why, the Fleischacker Zoo, they wanted to capture it for their menagerie. Mrs. Hornback, she would not let her children walk to Antioch Primary. And the customers downtown that had been strolling had stopped and didn't cater to the businesses downtown anymore. It all started on July 25th, 1934. That's when Anthony Romeo burst into the Antioch Ledger newspaper office. I was up at the old mines up there in my car when I was coming down, why this huge 20-foot snake just was right in front of me on the road and disappeared. And 2 weeks later, 3 fishermen saw it. We were out in Old River of fishing out there, and we saw some kind of huge serpent in the water. It swam and it submerged, and then it came up and surfaced and went off into the Tules. 3 weeks later, Farmer Fujitti in Knightson, he reported, I saw this huge 25-foot snake. It had black and yellow spots, and I was scared. I ran in to get a shotgun and help, but by the time I came back, all I saw was that trail heading to Jersey Ferry. All of these reports brought fear in all of the citizens around. Anthony wanted to know more about what kind of huge snake would be around here. So he wrote a letter to George Bastani of the Fleischacker Zoo, who was superintendent. Bastani called him on the phone. Mr. Anthony, no, there's no such native snakes in your area at all, not that huge. But I remember like 14 years ago, the traveling circus had come to Antioch, and when they left, their python escaped. It's possible that, why, with rodents to eat, goose eggs down at the water, swimming in the river, it could survive and be down in the mines, sleeping, and it could be down there. I know the newspapers called her Minnie. Did you hear about any capture? No, Bastani, I didn't. I was young then. I didn't hear about any capture. My parents, they called her Amy. Amy, yeah, Amy. After that, the citizens called her Amy Minnie. Short time later, Farmer Lorenzetti from Knightson, he came into the Board of Supervisors. Something's got to be done. Why, I saw this 30-foot snake, and it was huge. It was multicolored, and it had teeth, and it had fangs, and well, I've got children. It could squeeze them to death. Something's got to be done. The Board of Supervisors at that meeting considered an official snake district. But what do they know about capturing reptiles? They referred the matter to the district attorney. The citizens declared, inaction on the part of our Board of Supervisors. They're supposed to be protecting us. All these stories brought journalists. Why, the stories went to San Francisco, to Reno, and journalists came around. They wanted to talk to first-hand witnesses. They found Lorenzetti, but he said, no, that wasn't me who saw a big snake. Why, I only heard about it. It wasn't me. Well, all this time, there just were stories from all over California. And Bastani had been thinking about, he needed a big specimen for the zoo, but he decided to come because Contra Costa County was the best primary place where some huge snake could, as he had told Anthony, could exist. So he came out, he brought two big game hunters, and he searched. Why, he searched looking for evidence, looking for shed snake skins, looking for snake feces. They're very distinctive. He looked out on the banks of the San Joaquin River here. He looked out at the Knightson area. He went up to the mines, looking in the old abandoned coal mine area. Didn't find any evidence, and he left with his report inconclusive. That did calm the fears of the citizens. Well, for 1 month, and then in late October, early November, there was another smattering of reports. They were kind of the same. They'd say at night, they'd be out on the road with a friend. A friend was driving them around, and they came upon, oh my gosh, the headlights would hit a huge snake that was slithering across the road. But by the time their car turned around and they came back, they saw neither head nor tail. They all made their reports. They were so shocked to see this huge snake out in the field. Finally, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, Dean Marvin, he said, enough. I have a plan. The next person who cites Amy Minnie is to report to me. I have arranged with Fred Stam, the fire chief. He's going to sound the fire alarm. It's going to go 3 short blasts, 1 minute in between. And when you hear that, our 25 volunteers are going to meet me at City Hall. I'll tell them where the sighting was, and we shall go out for the capture. I have arranged with Jay Blowers, big game hunter. He's on call. Now he's going to work for us for a percentage. He knows why. If we capture it alive, it could bring $300. But if it's dead, only $50. And he's told no one is to bring any firearms, no firearms from anybody else. He's going to bring a gas gun. Only he will bring a gas gun and use it only if necessary. So the people waited, only a week. And then on November 14th, there suddenly was in the air the siren, 3 short blasts, 1 minute between. And more than the volunteers went down to City Hall. The citizenry went down to City Hall to learn that the sighting was up at the old Summersville abandoned mines. They all clambered in their trucks, their tractors, their cars and jalopies and up that little snaking road up to Summersville mine. Well, police chief let the volunteers through, but to the citizens, halt. You must wait here for your own safety. They had to peer through the dark, peering through the dark, listening. They saw flashlights, and then they heard men wrestling, and they heard the gas gun went off. Oh, and they saw men wrestling something huge. They wrestled it up into a big box up on the top of a flatbed truck that was lashed. And then the police chief told them, I've talked on my CB to the captors up there. Why, they tell me they've captured Amy Minnie. Amy Minnie is captured. Oh, finally, they said, hooray. We want to see her. Well, she was injured. You know, she was injured between the gas gun, they say, and the wrestling. She's going to need a couple of days of rest before she has any public viewing. The citizens had no choice. And then just a few days later on Friday in the Antioch News, Amy Minnie on display. It said that she would be at the dance down at the Antioch Veterans Memorial Hall. Come to the hall and see Amy Minnie. So you know they lined up. Oh, from near and far they came. There were like 300 people in this line just to see Amy Minnie. She was in a side room from the dance room, and they were shocked. They saw 2 snakes in one cage. Now, the first one was a 25-foot long cloth tube stuffed with excelsior. It had red electrically lit eyes. The second was what you see here, a 32-foot long rubber snake. They had an artist friend paint that rubber just so realistically that some people saw it and they were still convinced they saw a real snake that night. You are looking here at 7 men, and there were a few more who were in on a hoax. They only made their snakes at the very end of October. They made them because these are the businessmen of Antioch. You're looking at the fire chief, the Chamber of Commerce head, the police chief, the insurance man, and Mr. Roberts and Mr. Johnson. They own Antioch Tire and Electric. They volunteered tire inner tubes, truck tire inner tubes, and they volunteered to vulcanize them into this huge long snake that you are looking at. People thought that was it. Oh my gosh, some were scared and some were leery, but they were glad to see that it was a fake. You see, they arranged, after they made it, they would bring an unsuspecting friend and drive them up on the road while they went to Hillcrest, the railroad track. They went to Wilbur Avenue, which runs right parallel to the river, and up at Empire Mine Roads. They drove their friends who didn't know who this was. And of course, the friend had to make a report of the sighting because they were scared to death. Well, we'll never know what was really seen in late summer. We'll never know. And the zoo, they never got their specimen for a menagerie. Mrs. Hornback, though, she started letting her kids walk to Antioch Primary. And the customers returned to downtown for shopping and business. That Amy Minnie went on tour for 10 years to conventions, down to Hollywood, up to shows, out to the Liberty High School hijinks night. She went all over for 10 years. And then when the men saw that there was a war effort, World War II, that wanted rubber, Amy Minnie donated her body to the World War II effort. Well, We don't know about Amy Minnie. Is she still around? You know, on Monday, I saw a 14-inch snake up at the regional park. Maybe that one is going to grow into a new Amy Minnie. Thank you.
Wonderful piece of history. Thank you so much. And I've been wanting to tell you this for a long time. You know, when I taught down there at Los Donados College, on Monday nights, I used to go down to the pier in Antioch and fish at midnight because that's the best time for bass fishing down there. And every Monday night, this snake would slide up on the seat with me and I'd give him bass and eat 2 or 3 bass. So, you know, maybe that's the real Amy Minnie.
Maybe.
All right. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Okay, please welcome our next storyteller, Marilyn McPhee, our last teller for the evening. And Marilyn has been a professional storyteller since 1985. She said she had an opportunity to either clean houses or get into storytelling, and that's the route she took. And we are so lucky that she did that because she is the representative to the Pacific representative to the National Storytelling Network and has been involved in the storytelling community, started the Storytellers of San Diego, which she is representing tonight. And she is just a real gem in our community. So please welcome Marilyn McPhee.
You need to unmute, Marilyn.
There we go.
Okay.
So for a girl like Charlotte, living in 1840 in a little town in Maine, there was never enough excitement. Oh, she was the prettiest girl in town. Everyone said so. She was petite. She had a great figure. She had long blonde curls, bright blue eyes, and she was rich. Her parents were immigrants and had started out poor, but through a lot of hard work and some good luck, they had become quite well-to-do through shipping and manufacturing, and they loved to lavish on their only child whatever she desired. But as I said, it was never enough. So when Charlotte heard that the governor of the state was going to have a big gala New Year's Eve ball, she was excited. Now, the governor lived just a few towns away, about 15 miles away, and Charlotte figured this would be a great opportunity to make a splash in a little bit larger pond. So she immediately started planning. First thing on her list was the dress. She got she secured the efforts of the best dressmaker in town, and that assured 2 things. Number 1, she would have the efforts of the best dressmaker in town. And number 2, none of the other girls would. She was like that. She was very specific about what kind of a dress she wanted. It had to be the latest fashion from the fashion papers from Paris. And she had to have exactly the right fabric. Silk, blue silk to match her eyes and to rustle deliciously as she danced. Well, the dressmaker said that it was going to be very expensive, but Charlotte dismissed that with a wave of her hand and said money was no object. And once that was pinned down, she turned her efforts to the very next thing on her list, which was an appropriate escort. And here again, she was very specific in what she wanted, and it was very clear what her choice would be. Charlie, of course. He was the handsomest young man in town. He was tall with curly dark hair and a nice smile. He was a nice guy and not terribly bright, but he was handsome. She began flirting with him outrageously, and within the week, he asked her if he could take her to the dance. He probably would have asked her to marry him if she'd kept it up, but she kind of backed that off. That wasn't what she wanted. She just wanted a date for the dance. So let's see, she had the dress and she had the date. And then she began going down the rest of her list: shoes, jewelry, hair, checking each one off. And as the date got closer, she realized that there was just one thing that was concerning her, one thing she hadn't been able to check off her list, and that was the weather. It was winter, of course, was going to be a New Year's Eve ball, but even the old people in town couldn't ever remember a winter quite that cold. The snow was deeper and colder than in anyone's memory. And for a while, there was talk that the New Year's Eve ball would be canceled, but it wasn't. It was still on, and Charlotte was happy. So when New Year's Eve came, Charlie came to the door. Charlotte had remained upstairs because she wanted to make a grand entrance. What she said to her mother was, her goal was that when she and Charlie entered that ballroom, she wanted every head to turn. She wanted every eye to open wide, and she wanted to hear an audible gasp. Well, as she floated down the circular staircase, she could see that all the trouble she'd gone to was totally worth it. The dress had turned out even better than she'd expected. The skirt was just layers and layers and layers of ruffles, and not gathered ruffles, but pleated ruffles. It had taken their servant all day to iron the pleats into the skirt of that dress. And that was an iron that had to be heated on the stove. The bodice was form-fitting, and the neckline, which was also lined with ruffles, plunged daringly. Well, she could see the admiration in Charlie's eyes. When she got to the bottom of the stairs, she took his arm, and Charlotte's father said, "Now take care of my little girl." And Charlie said, "Oh, I will, sir." And Charlotte's mother held out a long, heavy woolen coat, and she said, "Don't forget your coat, Charlotte." But Charlotte dismissed that with a wave of her hand. "Oh, mother, I'm not wearing that coat. Why, if I wore the coat, I'd arrive at the ball looking like a crumpled dish rag. No, I'll be fine." And before her mother could say anything else, the two of them swept out the door. Now, Charlie had brought as their means of conveyance, not a wagon, not a coach, but in the words of a familiar song, a one-horse open sleigh. And he helped Charlotte up to her seat in front of the sleigh, and then he got on his side and he clicked the reins, and they were off. When they'd gone about 5 miles, Charlie reached behind him in the seat and he pulled out a blanket. He said, "Charlotte, I know you didn't want to wear that coat, but it's so cold. Wrap this blanket around you at least. It's really warm. I take it hunting all the time." But she said, "I didn't want a coat, and I really don't want your smelly old hunting blanket. No, but it is cold. We could go faster." So he urged the horses to go faster, and they went about another 5 miles. And then he reached again behind him and pulled out a lap robe. And he said, "Well, at least put this across your lap." It was buffalo hide with the buffalo fur still attached. She said, "Oh, no, I wouldn't be caught dead with that wrapped around me. In any case, I think I'm feeling a little bit warmer now." "Oh, well, I'm not," said Charlie, and he urged his horse to go faster. Finally, they got to the governor's mansion. The windows were all lit up. They could hear the music. And Charlie said, "Oh, Charlotte, I can hardly wait to get inside." He jumped down from his seat and ran around to where he could reach up. And he said, "Charlotte, give me your hand." But she didn't say anything, and she didn't reach for his hand. "Charlotte, come on, let's get inside where it's warm." But she didn't reach for his hand, and she didn't say anything. "Charlotte, come on." He grabbed her hand, and well, even through his thick gloves, he could tell that her hand was cold and stiff. And then he looked at her face. He picked her up in his arms and he ran into the ballroom. And as Charlie entered with Charlotte in his arms, every head turned, all the eyes opened wide, and there was an audible gasp. Exactly what she had wanted, but not quite in the way that she'd wanted it. Well, they did what they could, but it was no use. Charlotte had frozen to death. And there was nothing else for Charlie to do but to take her back home to her parents. He put her in the sleigh and wrapped her in the hunting blanket and the buffalo lap robe, though now they could do her no good. But when he entered Charlotte's parents' house with her body in his arms, Charlotte's mother screamed and fainted. She never regained consciousness and died 2 days later. And having lost his only child and his wife in the space of just a few days, Charlotte's father was distraught. He sold his business, he sold the house, and he moved west. But it wasn't just Charlotte's father that moved west because, well, the story was written up in the local newspaper, and then it was carried by several other newspapers. And a year or so later, there was a long narrative poem about the whole event that was written by a poet named Seba Smith. And after a while, that was put to a song, and the song and the story moved west as well. But there was one other thing that became attached to the story of Frozen Charlotte, and that was a doll. From the mid 1800s to 1900, pretty much every little girl owned 1 or 2 or 10 of these little dolls. They were imported from Germany by the thousands and thousands. Sometimes they were called penny dolls because they were very inexpensive. And girls had them, they could dress them up in little bits and pieces of fabric and lace, and they would play with them. And sometimes as they played, they would tell the story about Frozen Charlotte, and very beautiful and romantic and tragic. Their parents never stopped them telling that story because after all, what's the message of the story? If she had only listened to her mother, she wouldn't have died. Parents like to emphasize that story, right? And so if you ever see the contents of any archaeological excavation from Maine to San Diego, every place in between and some places far beyond, most of them will include 1 or 2 or 10 of these Frozen Charlotte dolls. This one is a replica that I bought in Kansas City, Kansas, but I have seen them everywhere. So there was the story and the poem and the song and the doll, but there's one other thing that became attached to the story of Frozen Charlotte. Maybe you've heard of, and maybe you've even tasted, a dessert called Frozen Charlotte. It's a very fancy dessert, something you would serve for, say, a New Year's ball. And it is cold, and it is rich, and it is fancy, just like the real Charlotte. But those who knew the real Charlotte say that there is one difference, because the real Charlotte wasn't all that sweet. And that is the story of Frozen Charlotte.
Oh boy, yeah. What a great tale. That's so well told too. Thank you very much for that. I'm gonna remember that one and definitely check out for some of those little dolls somewhere. I'm wanting some archaeological dig.
Ed, you're muted.
Everybody should be able to unmute themselves now.
Yeah, we can all unmute ourselves. I want to mention that the next month of storytelling will be legends, urban and traditional legends. And we have 3 people that have come forth so far. So if any of you with swap groups have an urban legend that you'd like to bring forth, let your group leader know and see about being nominated for that event. It is on May 17th. It's always the 3rd Wednesday of the month. So hopefully you can attend that. And you couldn't hear me, Marilyn. I guess I was muted. But thank you so much for your story. Fascinating and so well told. You are a real polished storyteller. Thank you. And now we are we're going to leave everything open for about 10 minutes. Everyone can unmute yourself as you leave. You could come on, say hello. The storytellers can talk with each other. It's open to anyone who wants to say.
Andre, your story was riveting and had my heart pumping, and I'm glad you're retired now and can go back to being wanting to go back and be a forest ranger. And we really need people that look like you out there in the forest too. So I hope you really do that.
Thank you.
So we had nice attendance tonight. Looks like a lot of people were interested in this historical piece. And I'm just impressed with the variety of the stories.
Yes.
Uh, each person
Great variety.
had a real interesting perspective and different information. And I don't hear too often. I go to a lot of different storytelling groups. I don't hear a lot of historical pieces, so I really like this opportunity.
Yeah, that was good choice.
Yes, indeed.
I want to go out and buy a lute, Peter.
Ah,
Me too.
Oh, they're fun.
I'm not even sure what a lute is. Can you describe it a little bit?
Well, you know the guitar,
Sure.
and so imagine a guitar transformed flat on top with a big fat belly and a long neck.
Okay.
Every single one a piece of art. In the beginning, you don't know if they are medieval or up to date, but apparently there is a thriving industry in lutes even today.
Is there any similarity to a dulcimer?
Some, it's not that clear.
Okay.
To me, the lute is so distinctive, so it turns its back to all the other instruments and goes its own way.
And is it strummed like a
Oh,
guitar?
some Charlotte dolls. It popped right up.
Nice. Oh, really? Oh, cool. Charlotte's dolls. So you have a collection, Marilyn? You're muted.
I've got this one that's a reproduction. I got a couple of those.
Uh-huh.
And then I've got a couple that, a lot of them are, have been broken, of course,
Yeah.
over the years. So actually, if you go on eBay, you can buy like a lot of frozen Charlotte doll heads, just the heads,
Mhm.
or just the legs or something like that. People use them in all kinds of things. And then I have a couple of these tiny ones. Yeah.
Can you tell me the time period again? I don't remember.
Yes, supposedly the story happened in 1840.
Okay.
So it was written up in 1840 and then picked up by some other newspapers in 1840, 41, 42, 43. Yeah. And the dolls were popular up into the very early 1900s.
Mhm. I
And-
loved your delight in the story.
Yes.
Well, it really threw me for a loop, man. It's like all of a sudden, what do you mean? What? I was like,
It was a cautionary tale, huh? I never heard of this story or the song or the poem, but I just went on YouTube and I'm going to put in the chat Natalie Merchant, who's a kind of famous young violinist, I think she is, but it's kind of
Singer.
traditional music, like American roots musician. She has a version, so I'm gonna listen to it when we say
Yeah,
goodbye.
there are a couple on YouTube.
Are there others you recommend?
There aren't as many as you would think. The last time I checked, there were just, seems like maybe 3, something like that. But, and always with a little bit of a variation, but fun stuff.
yeah, great story.
We should have announced the program tomorrow night, Liz. Do you want to just go ahead with the people that are left here?
Oh, let's see, is Sally still here? Sally has turned off her, Contra Costa Tail Spinners swap is tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. And if anybody wants to come, we'd love to have you. We meet every month, last Thursday, fourth Thursday of the month. And I'll put in my email if anybody wants the info. Or I guess,
Plus, people can go to the Storytelling Association California website to all the swap groups, right, and find your information there.
Yeah.
thank you, Ted.
Anybody else? Any comments or interests? Anything you want to share with us?
I wanted to thank Peter.
I want to thank everybody for sharing their stories. It was wonderful. It was a great night.
Yeah, definitely.
I wanted to thank Peter because he reminded me of how beautiful the lute can sound. My brother plays the lute, and it is a beautiful, beautiful instrument. So thank you.
Okay,
So
that's the
while
best.
people are looking things on YouTube, find some beautiful lute music.
And who's talking right now?
Mm-hmm.
This is Ida.
Oh,
So
hi. Good. Hi.
hi. So enjoy some lute music after Peter's
Good.
story.
Do you play lute? I didn't quite get, isn't it laying down? You play it so it's flat?
No, no, no.
Okay.
Like a guitar, but Peter,
What's that?
it's held a bit like a guitar. Peter can tell me.
It is, yes.
I feel like when you see the pictures, like paintings of people dressed in Shakespearean or medieval outfits,
Yes,
and they're
right.
playing. There's the young man, and he's singing to the young, or someone that they're playing a lute. Is that?
Good.
I
Absolutely
mean, not
correct.
only, but that's my image of a lute.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And you know
To
what?
me, the weirdest thing was here is this story about a musical instrument and the Europeans, and I know I come from there, they just couldn't help themselves and wage another war.
Yeah.
No matter what war they were going to fight.
Yeah.
I heard that 30 Years War in Germany, it killed like 20% of the population.
Wow.
And in the worst hit area, 50%.
Mm.
Crazy.
Now,
Yes.
which were the countries involved in the 30-year war? I don't know that history.
It started between Germany and France, but before you know it, all the other well, and of course there was no single Germany. There were individual states then,
Okay.
but then all the countries got involved, and
Sweden,
when you
Denmark.
read that history, that they didn't care what the outcome was, how many people would get killed, how many cities would get destroyed. They were going to wage war. It's completely beyond me.
So what happened at the very end of it? How was it resolved and what was left? Or did they have form new city states or anything?
They had some rearrangements, and it was a little bit clearer, but in general it was in especially in Germany, whoever the leader was of a country determined what the religion was.
Yeah. Okay.
And in Spain, you had a couple of Catholic kings who didn't tolerate any dissent. And the country I am from, the Netherlands, it was mainly Protestant, but basically the rulers said, we don't care, making trading is much more important than what kind of religion you belong to. But still, looking back on it, it's still beyond me how people can take their religion so serious that doesn't matter how many people get killed in the process. That's what they want.
Still happening today.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
It felt like that was such a theme of tonight, is that history that, uh, the echoes of history and the things that, repeat themselves.
Right.
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah. We never
Or we
see.
may forget, like with the Charlotte, like we might know the dessert and we might not know the story. And yet these sometimes names or instruments or are things they carry a lot of history in them, but we may not know it until we hear people like all of you bring it to us.
Well, I hope I
Felt
never
that a
see like,
lot tonight.
I hope I
Or a
never see,
recipe. A recipe is such a
Oh,
good
yes,
example.
right.
That's fun.
Well,
I
yeah, it
hope I
was so
never see that
interesting, the
famous
different
snake.
kinds of history. Yeah, tonight.
Yeah, and I like your emphasis on the natural world and like different kinds of wood. I know for me, I am very interested in wood crafting and how people do that. I just drove down the Oregon coast and I stopped at this wood carver in the town of Seal Cove.
Uh-huh. Oh, yes, right.
Oh my gosh, this guy is unbelievable. The things that he has in his gallery. They're like $3,000 to $10,000 kinds of pieces that he has. I mean, it's just
Oh,
amazing work. And he's an interesting guy. He just finds a good piece of wood. He knows what,
uh-huh, yes,
and he's got his artist vision. He looks at that and he goes, "All right, this is what I can do with that." And the artist comes out. It's fascinating to me to watch people craft,
yes.
like good storytellers. Artists, different people.
And it's more than $10,000. I've seen individual wood crafters who found a piece of wood, a bowl or something like that, or an walnut burl or so, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden they're asking 40, 50, $60,000. It's and people pay it. That's even crazier.
Okay, any other comments? All right. Hey, Lori Friedman, thanks for coming on. She goes to a lot of storytelling events, and she was my neighbor at the Muir Commons Housing Co-op here in Davis. Hey, Lori, welcome.
Great
Thanks,
stories
everybody.
tonight, guys. Thank you so much.
Okay, see y'all later.
I have
Right,
something to
thanks.
say real quickly.
Okay.
Um, PBS had a series called Now Hear This, a series of episodes about different composers, and the episode on Scarlatti tells all about how the Moorish influence came into Spain and influenced classical music, and talks a little bit about the development of the instruments too. If you get a chance to watch that at some time, or any of this series, they're really fascinating. Scott Yu is a conductor that travels around and talks to people and explores the history of the development of different styles of music. But the one on Scarlatti tells all about the Moorish influence on classical music. It's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now hear
Oh,
this.
good.
Again, that's on PBS.
It's on PBS. I just stuck something in the chat if you can look for that.
Oh yeah, YOOS, huh?
And I also stuck at the beginning of the chat, the Seattle Guild is having a workshop on telling tall tales on May 1st in the morning. You're welcome if you want to come. Ingrid Nixon, who's a very champion liars contest person, got a PhD in storytelling from Eastern Tennessee. Is going to be teaching it. $15. It's a really good workshop. Information is available on seattlestorytellers.org.
Yeah, I've signed up for that. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to seeing you there, Ed.
I've heard who Andrew, you're doing it?
I'm up. No, I didn't know anything about it.
Oh, okay, Barry. It was Barry. Okay. Oh, great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Ingrid Nixon I've heard, is just an amazing storyteller. Have you heard her, Marilyn?
Oh, yeah, she's fabulous. Well worth listening to. Pretty much anything she tells.
Isn't it more than a one-day event? Isn't it a couple of weekends or something? Or not? Is it just
Well,
one
our
day?
workshop is just one morning. We're going to do a liars program later in the month.
Right. Okay.
But if you want to hear Ingrid, just go to ingridnixon.com. She's got lots of places. I can't believe how much storytelling she does. She told for us last Friday night at our Earth Day's Tales. And if you want to
She was
watch
on the
that,
MSN Earth Up.
yeah, I've got it now on our YouTube, Seattle Storytellers Guild YouTube, and also on Seattle Storytellers Facebook pages.
And is Alicia still there? Alicia, I saw your message. You do have to be recommended to be a teller by a story swap group. Are you still there, Alicia?
No, she's not here anymore.
Well, I have her email. She had emailed me to get this information. Anyway, she had asked in the chat there. She'd like to share a Miwok legend in May, but
Thank you for all your work, Ed.
You're welcome.
Good job,
And
Ed.
thank you, Andrew.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
welcome. Thank you. Okay,
Okay.
folks, have a great night.
All right.
Bye,
Night,
take
See you
care.
all.
Okay,
Tomorrow night at the
See you.
Contra Costa Story Swap group.
All right.
Thank you.